Good morning, viewers and listeners. Welcome back to the Free Marketeers podcast/vlog. Thank you once again for joining me. I hope all of you are doing okay in lockdown. Looking forward to the end of May when we might get some news about level 3, but let's not hold our breath. Let's see what the government comes to with us at that time. This morning, I'm joined by GG Alcock. I'm sure many of you know about him. If you don't, you're in for a treat today. I look forward to talking to him for a very long time. I've been reading his work, his books, and I think he's doing very important work in South Africa, especially for South Africans who might not be seen by the media or many of us in our middle-class, wealthy suburbs. GG, thank you very much for being here.
Great, thank you.
I thought we'd start talking about maybe a bit of your background, some of the work you've done in the past, maybe to give the listeners and the viewers some context for our conversation today.
Sure. So I grew up in a mud hut in the middle of one of the poorest places in South Africa then, a place called Msinga. It's still the poorest district in South Africa officially. My parents were political activists and they believed the only way to change people's lives was to live just like them. So they built a mud hut with no running water, no electricity, and we grew up in like Zulu kids. And then kind of long story short, I ended up as a political activist for a while, working in the townships. And then I started a business in the township environment at a time when people really didn't believe there was a market in that township space. It was called Minanawe Marketing, and we became the premium marketing business focusing on the townships. And part of that was we really needed to understand both the cultures and lifestyle of people in the townships to apply to our work, but more importantly was to understand the massive economies within that space, particularly within the informal economy. So, and as a result of some of the work, and we had some amazing successes, one of them, which we kind of became famous for, is we created a 2.5 billion rand a year market for cheese slices in the what's called quarters, which is a township hamburger and vetkoeks or amagwinya. And it never existed before, and we created this massive sector for Parmalat cheese slices. And it was really about recognizing these informal economies. And so my work has really been about primarily all of the work. I'm not a researcher or anything. The work was really built around specific clients who wanted to access certain market segments, distribute into those markets, and so on. And I eventually wrote, I wrote a book called Third World Child White Born Zulu Bred, which was about growing up as a Zulu child and the move to the city. And then KasiNomics, and then more recently KasiNomic Revolution, which were about the cultures, the lifestyles, and most importantly, the economics of that sector, just highlighting the massive sectors there. There's no term really for informal economy, so I developed this term of KasiNomics, which Kasi comes from the term Lokasi, which has become the trendy, cool term for the townships. And so KasiNomics really about, as much as it's called KasiNomics, the informal sector is all around us. It's not just in the township space. It's a food caravan on a main road. It's a trader at the robots. It's downtown Johannesburg, Randburg, wherever it might be, as well as obviously a massive township-based economy.
I think that that distinction, maybe it's a false distinction for many people that has come about as a result of this term of the informal sector versus the formal sector. I mean, who is it for any of us or any politician to decide what falls in informal and formal? I think any trade between individuals should be considered, good and productive and creating value. So I think we should definitely do some work in moving away from that understanding of formal versus informal, just because we can't classify it in maybe, the financial sector or the industrial sector, one of those. I think what you're doing, what you're pointing to is very important work.
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistake people make is that when they consider the informal or the township economies, they think of survivalist, or they talk about survivalist and micro businesses.
Right, sort of day-to-day, hand-to-mouth, yeah.
100%. which is absolutely crazy. Or they think of spaza shops. You know, in my mind, you know, people just say, oh, it's spazas, and it's like there's just a copy and paste, hole in the wall spaza shops, and that's the total economy. And if we just look at that economy, I mean, it's definitely not survivalist. Most of those businesses have been in business for 5, 10, 20 years, and it's not and it's not a micro. And I give examples in my books. For instance, I profiled a lady in downtown Johannesburg who sells vetkoek, and she is one of many. And she, well, there's two of them. The one I profiled, her and her husband have been there for 11 years. They sell 3,000 vetkoek every single day for R1 each. And they sell about 1,000 rand, 500 to 1,000 rands worth of tea and coffee and cheese slices and fish and polony. So they earn about 3,500 rand a day, 6 days a week, and their margins are about 40% on that. So they're making 1,500 rand odd a day. They're building a 2-story house in Meadowlands in Soweto. They're certainly not survivalists. Another one I wrote, and across the road from her is another young lady who's 24, who's been there for 4 years. She sells 6,000 vetkoek every single day. She couldn't find a job, so she started selling vetkoek. She comes from Limpopo. She's 24 years old. And she employs 3 staff, you know, her brother and 2 others. I wrote about a lady in a schoolyard selling snacks to kids in Tembisa, who's been selling off the same table for 26 years. She's put 2 kids through university over that time. Her husband's been unemployed. And she makes a profit of 6,500 rand every single month. And I said to her, if you could get a job, would you take it? And she was like, what would I do? Come to your house and wash your underpants? You know? So, because it puts it in perspective. She could be a domestic worker or something, working 8 hours a day. She works 3 hours a day and makes 6,500 rand a month. And then if you look at just the Gorda sector, if you look at the typical Gorda is making anything from 15,000 rand a day up to 50,000 rand a day in turnover. You know, the one outlet I profiled in Soweto, they get 600 loaves of bread delivered a day. They make quarters, so the word quarter comes from a quarter loaf of bread. So they make 2,400 quarters every single day. He's got his staff peel 85 bags of potatoes every single day for slug chips. And he bought a Jeep cash for, you know, over 500,000 rand. His biggest problem was trying to get someone to accept his money.
Oh my word.
So it's not survivalist. It's invisible, yes,
Sure.
and to many people, it may be, it's informal in some ways, but that doesn't make it unsophisticated. You know, and we make these linear judgments. The assumption is informal means low income and unsophisticated. The reality is many of these businesses are highly sophisticated, making really good margins. They've been operating for years and years, and are successful. And we saw now what I call the Gasiko sector, the fast food sector, is worth about 85 billion rand a year with 50,000 outlets. So if you just look at that sector, when the minister, I'm working with the Business for South Africa, and we've been pushing for, along with the formal sector, informal sector interventions and opening up. And we pushed strongly with the fast food formal sector for outlets to be opened up and allow takeaway. They, of course, only allowed delivery. Within the first 3 or 4 days of delivery, most of these outlets had their menus on Facebook and were accepting orders on WhatsApp. You know, you send your PIN number, your PIN location, and your order, and they have a guy on a bicycle or a youngster who jogs down the street and delivers your chicken or your shisanyama or whatever it might be. And this just indicates the sophistication of these businesses.
And the adaptability. I think it really speaks to their ability to weather these storms. I mean, one of the main reasons I wanted to get you on, apart from, you know, the stories that you can tell of people with whom you've worked and their stories that you've tried to tell, is also just I think a lot of focus has been on the knock to the GDP of the lockdown and the job losses. And of course, we know South Africa has this endemic unemployment problem. Before the lockdown, we had probably close to 20 million people unemployed. Who knows what it's going to be afterwards? And of course, small and medium businesses are going to be hit very hard. But I think, just your take on the effect of the lockdown on, quote unquote, the informal sector. I mean, my imagination tells me it's devastating, but as you mentioned, for some, they can adapt, they're resilient, they can deal with what comes their way. But just what do you think in terms of government's approach and the lockdown, I guess, as a whole picture?
Look, it's a multifaceted issue, but if you look at my figures prior to lockdown, controversially, was that real unemployment and lack of income generating activities was closer to 12% versus the 29% the government or official figures. So there's a far larger sector that is there, and yes, it is going to be impacted. And but before I go into the impacts on it and government response, I think the important thing about the informal sector, in many ways, they're much more adaptable and able to batter down the hatches. We found a lot of research has shown, and I've seen the same, up to 80% of small businesses are operating from a residential premises, either from their home, or they've built a little hair salon at the back, or whatever it might be. So this means that they're not paying for rent. It means they can close the doors, sit tight, and so this is the one side, the positive side. The negative side is that none of the government interventions, nothing that the Department of Small Business Development has done, are applicable or are available to these small businesses, primarily because they expect CIPC registration. Right. And we all know how difficult that is to get, let alone anything else. And if you wanted to do it now, the spaza sector was expected to get permits, and they needed copies of their CIPC stuff. The internet cafes were closed. So where were people supposed to get this kind of, make copies and etc.? So this 300 billion rand government guarantee for loans and stuff, this will never be applicable to the small business sector, the informal sector, because they're looking for 20 or 50, a max 100,000 rands worth of credit. Right. But banks aren't geared to offer that kind of thing. I've made a recommendation that the microfinance sector pivot and actually start offering business loans, because they're geared to provide a multitude of small loans. They have the infrastructure, they've got the systems and so on. And so that 300 billion rand credit guarantee should be it should be accessible to the microfinance sector in my mind. So there are very few of these benefits that are going to accrue. The spaza support program from the Department of Small Business has had woeful response because it's completely inappropriately structured to assist a spaza shop, let alone a fast food outlet. And so, from an assistance perspective, this sector has been ignored despite the massive contribution it makes. I mean, if you just look at the informal sector, the spaza sector is worth 250 billion rand. The hair salon sector is worth 10 billion rand. The fast food sector, as I said, is worth about 85+ billion rand. When the lockdown first started, spaza shops and, most importantly, vegetable hawkers and fast food outlets were blocked from operating. The Joburg Municipal Market saw a 40% decline in their turnover on things like potatoes, which were obviously going into slab chips and stuff. 40% decline. That tells you that, in essence, 40% of our agricultural produce in this country is going through vegetable hawkers and township fast food outlets, among others. So this is a massive sector in terms of turnover and so on, and they're going to get no benefit out of this. And look, on the upside of it, most of them are resilient, they're agile, they're very quick to adapt. we saw bakeries as an example. I wrote about a small township bakery who immediately started, he got a permit, and then he got trolleys, and his guys started walking the streets, selling bread street by street. He used to sell to larger businesses. And he's doing really well, and he built a little ordering system and so on. So they are agile, but I think that about 20 to 30% of the smaller businesses with less reserves are going to fall out of the system. They're just not going to have the resources to, a hair salon as an example. I spoke with one of the producers of the leading hair product for salons, and they have lost 95% of their turnover, which tells you 95% of township hair salons are not operating. And as a result, average hair salon, what do they have? A month's worth of reserves. If they don't open within a month which has already gone past, they don't have the money to buy more stock. They don't have the money to start again. So the smaller guys will just close the doors and go there. So one of the benefits, that's why I said it's multifaceted. However, having said that, one of the benefits is that the social grants have been increased by this 500 Rand. So if you look at the average child grant of say 800 Rand a month, they get an extra 500 Rand. The average old age pensioner who earns about 1,800 Rand a month gets an additional 500 Rand. So between 30 and 50% more in essence that they're getting. A lot of this money is spent in the informal sector. And it's one of the drivers of the informal sector has been the fact that this money is at the lowest levels of the population. And the Goko would rather spend at the spaza or at the fast food outlet in her street rather than pay a taxi and then carry her stuff home. So there's pros and cons.
Sure. I think,
overall, there is going to be an impact.
A lockdown, at least a hard lockdown to me, is just a very blunt tool. I'm sure a lot of people understand the fear around COVID-19, but it's a very across the board approach. There's no nuance, and it's almost like using a hammer when a scalpel would be better. I would like to use that analogy. So I just think it's important to highlight how, yes, for many people, this hard lockdown can be fine and they can work from home kind of thing. They've got Wi-Fi and all this stuff, but just the impact on people who, who are contributing massively to the economy and that many people don't see. They don't see it day to day. Of course, many people don't drive through downtown Joburg or to go to the townships or anything like that. So I just think that's very important to highlight how you probably would have seen much more support and a lockdown would have lasted longer to better effect if it had been a bit more nuanced.
100%. Look, and the other component of that is that in many cases, townships are impossible to lock down.
Sure.
Especially the informal settlements within the township environment. The other thing is that what we see, and we see it the same, and I've got a business colleague in Lagos. Lagos saw exactly the same. When livelihoods are compromised, health protocols are ignored. So,
right.
And I wrote an article early this week, just highlighting that townships have gone back to level 1. The car washes are open. The upholsterers are pushing their stuff on the street. The hair salons are opening and stuff like that. People in the townships, making a living is an essential service. Yep. And so people have just gone back to work, and the police and the army have kind of thrown their, arms in their hair. So, car washes are open, and I had a great picture from my network in the townships of a GTI being washed in a car wash and the Metro Police car being washed next to the GTI. So of course the car wash guy is saying to the Metro cop, "I'll wash your car. You just don't snitch on me."
No, of course.
And most of the fast food outlets are saying, never take the police and army out the townships. They are best customers. They need to eat, so they're the ones buying the chicken and the shisanyama and the stuff. Without a delivery, So
are you telling me you found out where those 70,000 troops are?
I can tell you they queued up around most quarter outlets.
I've been wondering where they were. Okay, no, it makes sense. Okay, fair enough.
And it's funny, the same fast food outlet people I was talking to, they're saying, look, this delivery system is a benefit for us, because they said, you know, your child asks for a burger from KFC or McDonald's or whatever, you can't afford to pay delivery. So you say to them, no, it's fine. I'll get you chicken from the local grilled chicken outlet on the corner, you know. So they're benefiting from the formal sectors.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Kind of, yeah.
I wanted to touch on that article. There was a mention there of the GAP Goat project in KZN. And I thought, I mean, you know, at the FMF, we of course, a lot of our work is about pointing out problems in government policies and interventions. And we always advocate for more freedom for people to trade and do business and that sort of thing. But, you know, we're always looking for solutions. So from your perspective, I thought this was something very important to highlight, a potential way of working forward and a solution for people on the ground.
Yeah, so my brother still stays in Msinga, and he runs this project, which is called the Goat Agribusiness Project. And in essence, or the sub-name for it is the Billion Goat Project, because I mean, the goats is a crazy thing. There's a worldwide demand for goats. The Saudi Arabian government has asked KwaZulu government to supply them 1 million goats a year. And the Saudis currently get about 3 million goats a year from Somalia. It's the largest livestock on the hoof market on the planet. And of course, we import 300,000 goats a year from Namibia and Botswana because we cannot supply our own needs. So despite this massive opportunity, I think it's a 2.5 billion rand a year opportunity to sell Saudi Arabia 1 million goats. They of course have to be live because they're for sacrificial purposes.
Right.
But anyway, so we cannot supply a single goat to Saudi Arabia because we cannot supply our own needs. And the reality is that if you look in most of the rural arid areas, certain particular districts, goats are perfect. The problem with goats is that you have, so the positive is that men are into cattle and they're not interested in goats. So this is a wonderful opportunity for women. The problem is, as my brother and their project found out, is that there's a very high mortality of young goats unless there's certain interventions. But if you address those small interventions, basically a goat will have twins, sometimes almost twice a year. So the ability to reproduce and grow your goat herd is massive. They're browsers, so in areas where there's very little grass, they survive. They eat anything from tamboti leaves to plastic bags. And so they've developed this program in these 5 rural districts where they, in essence, are providing veterinary products at spaza shops. They give them a freezer and they train the guy. They put a poster up in the spaza with the different diseases and what to do. They train the spaza shop owner. So next to the Coke fridge, he's got a veterinary fridge. They train other people to supply feed blocks, which they basically make on a brick machine. So instead of making bricks, they're making these blocks to feed the young kids, goat kids. And then they have a training program and so on and so forth. And then they have set up this network of auction sites. And these sites are, in essence, connecting speculators or buyers who are wanting to buy goats with farmers. And they've set up a payment system because obviously the biggest issue, no one wants to pay cash and you can't use checks anymore. So they've set up a payment system where they are the intermediary between the buyers and the local communities. And they turned over 80 million rand in goat sales. That's the goat sales they're tracking that are directly through them last year. That's in 5 of 16 districts in KZN. Can you imagine the opportunities everywhere else? And I mean,
talk about the radical economic transformation and growing 100%. Things from the ground up. This is exactly the sort of thing, you know, we're aiming at.
So, I mean, he's got examples of a Goko who earned nothing 3 years ago, and she had 15 goats. She now has, 30, 35 goats, and she sells, 10 to 20 of these a year, and she's now making 40,000 rand a year. I mean, you must know, this is someone who earns 1,800 rand a month and is suddenly earning all of this additional money. And many of them,
magnates.
Yeah, 100%. The thing about it, it's the same with the informal sector. The trick with the informal sector generally is that it's like the gig economy. First of all, it's generally invisible. Second of all, it's massively fragmented. So it's a multitude of individual small businesses that make up a massive sector. So, you know, Uber is the largest taxi service in the world where the guys don't own a single taxi. You know, it's this highly fragmented multitude of individual businesses. Airbnb the same, and so on and so forth. Informal sector is the same. 50,000 fast food outlets making up a 90 billion rand a year sector, and so on and so forth. So the trick is, how do we maximize, understand that fragmentation, and hence in their program, as an example, it's not about one farmer who has 5,000 goats. It's about 5,000 farmers who have 20 goats each. And then creating the infrastructure and assistance to assist lots of small businesses. And my keys, success I spoke about was based on the same. It was understanding that there were, say, 10,000 quarter outlets out there, and how did we then distribute and get buy-in from those 6,000. So it's not about going to ShopRite and selling to one DC and one buyer. It's about 6,000 little outlets who together form a far larger business than the formal retailer. And that's why we have to look differently at this sector.
It strikes me as a very, grassroots, almost bottom-up approach, whereas we're always looking at these big economic interventions, and we've got these buzzwords around structural reform and, as I mentioned, radical economic transformation, and with these, these big ideas, which of course we do need. Sometimes you need something to look over on the horizon, but I think what you're mentioning is definitely an example of, something that's actually working on the ground, and that might be a lot more robust than simply dumping X amount of money into a sector and expecting everything to be fixed. For example, like we have with agriculture, we've expected we'll just give, we'll give different people a certain amount of money and expect them to make successful farms of things without the infrastructure and the support and anything like that.
So, I mean, in KasiNomic Revolution, I kind of highlighted a few key elements, and I believe that the secret to creating more than 1 million jobs is in this informal sector. We're not going to create them in the formal sector. We weren't going to before COVID, and we're certainly not going to now. Just the nature of worldwide business, you're not going to do that. I think that you can create them in the informal sector. So for me, the first is you have to recognize these as businesses, and you have to start structuring interventions for the sector. They're not survivalists, they're not micro, they are businesses. The second thing is, and before in the intro, we were chatting about your thing around title deeds.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest opportunities in the sector is about giving some sort of security of tenure. I've recommended what I call PTOs. In the rural areas, used to get a permission to occupy, which was in essence a permission. It's like sectional title. You own the rights to operate off a certain space, although you'll never own it. And I think PTOs, for instance, would work in inner cities where you have the rights to operate off a certain piece of pavement, or you can operate in a certain part of a taxi rank. The advantage of this is that, people start investing in their business because they know the metro cops aren't going to come and chase them away or confiscate their goods and so on. And more importantly, you create value by being able to sell your business.
Yes.
And if you don't have the rights to that piece of pavement, how do you sell that business? In essence, you're selling a Kodak gas cylinder and an old table,
Yeah.
So, but now you would suddenly be creating real value for those businesses. The next one for me is about microfinancing. It's about financing and business type finance, where you can. What we've seen is that with the Somalis as an example, they have completely disrupted the spaza sector and in large supermarket types. They're disrupting ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Spar, etc. And they've grown that spaza sector. And the way they've done it is that they mobilize money within their groups. And they invest that money into stock. They invest that money into extending the spaza from a hole in the wall into a supermarket aisle type layout. And many examples that I spoke about where a small, the biggest problem for all businesses is cash flow. So if you can get a micro loan to invest in stock so that you can actually, instead of buying and selling, you buy a little bit more and you sell a bit more and so on and so forth. You can invest in equipment. If you're bought the outlet, you can grow the size of your shop and so on. But we have no financing for that sector. So for me, that's the next platform. The third is regulation. And that regulation is whether it's bylaws, FICA laws, or can the microfinance industry currently lend money to a quarter outlet who's turning over 50,000 Rand a day? They can't, because the measures of affordability are ridiculous. They're like, we need to see an audited statement and a pay slip and so on and so forth. So we need to change those regulations. We need to change bylaws to allow for informal businesses to operate. I'm not saying that they must lower the standards, but it's about allowing that. And part of the change of regulations is CIPC. We need to, I read a thing this morning in one of the papers that in Rwanda, it takes 4 days to register your business. In South Africa, it takes 40. And that's if you're lucky, and you have all the right paperwork, so.
And the bigger, sorry to interrupt, but bigger corporates and companies, they've got the resources to deal with the legislation and the filing and all this stuff. So it's fine for them, but these sorts of bylaws and regulations you mentioned, these are massive barriers to entry.
I sold my business Minanawe to an international marketing group, and I went on my own in the beginning of 2019, and I registered my new business. And I suddenly didn't have a PA and an accountant and a financial manager. And I had to do it myself. And I've been in business for 25 years and ran a multi-million business. And I so struggled with the CIPC regulation stuff. It was just ridiculous. And then they sent me this and asked me about that. Don't even mention registering for VAT, where I had to go and sit for 5 hours at SARS and Randburg because they wanted a face-to-face interview. I mean, how does someone leave their business if they're selling goods, fast food, and go and sit at SARS for 4 hours, Yep. So 100%, we need to enable this. And I believe there's an opportunity to develop almost like the old CCs, How do you have another level that is not a PTY, that is for smaller micro businesses? With an incentive to get involved. And most of these businesses, a lot of people say to me, yeah, but these people don't pay tax, which is not entirely true. But yes, they don't pay tax on profits. My experience is that they will pay rent and they will pay tax if there's an incentive to do that. More importantly, however, they pay VAT and they don't claim on VAT. So there's a net benefit. Now, if you consider that a Unilever, as an example, 75% of their products will be going through wholesalers into the township or informal market. They're making massive profits on that 75% of their turnover. That profit is a direct result of an informal sector consumption. But just consider the VAT that is paid on all of those products. And that is not claimed back by these small businesses. So that's a form of taxation. And I could go on, I won't go into much detail. But anyway, regulation has to change. We have to give some sort of security of tenure. We have to allow these businesses to be financed. And I strongly believe, and I showed lots of examples around Africa and some of the examples I've been involved in, with those simple interventions, you can completely transform our economy. You can make it inclusive on the one hand. You can increase your tax base and your rental base. And apart from anything, you don't suddenly have these massive unemployment problems because you're generating more jobs within that sector.
I think I've learned a lot today. I think you've pointed to many things that for people, they might have in the back of their minds. To me, when I read about, unemployment and that sort of thing, and we try and come up with solutions, we try and think always pointed, focused on the individuals, on their problems and what they need day to day and what challenges are presented with them. We try and get to those solutions. So in that regard, I think our conversation has been invaluable. I want to thank you so much. I will give you the final word, although I think what you talked about just now was probably the best note on which to end, but just your maybe, I don't know, parting thoughts in general for the viewers and the listeners.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess in short, I think that there are huge opportunities in that space that are ignored. And opportunities, I wrote in KasiNomic Revolution, the most successful, what I call revolutionaries in the informal sector. These were corporate businesses. Like one is called the Tolerant Group in Nigeria that sells $1 billion worth of instant noodles a year in Nigeria. Amazing business. All of these businesses invested in their partner suppliers and small businesses down the line. There's another business that creates in East Africa that has small loans for small businesses. Grow a huge business. Is that there are opportunities in this space for corporates and small businesses alike, which have reciprocal benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But we just have to look at it differently. There's 10 million cars I wrote about on the roads that are uninsured because you can't pay cash for an insurance policy in this country. If it's not a debit order, we can't accept it. Well, how do we look differently at that? Home loans, there's 30 billion rand a year in backroom rental being received by township households. Imagine the opportunity to lend their money to build more backrooms or to provide services to that sector and so on. So I think there's massive opportunities which at the same time as making money for a business are growing small businesses or informal businesses. And there lies the opportunity. But we have to think differently about business. And the starting point for me is look at these as businesses. They're not survivalists. Don't say, oh, shame, look at that poor granny on the street, but she's earning 30,000 rand a month profit. She doesn't need shame. It's an opportunity. And for me, that was the biggest thing. Start by seeing them as businesses, recognize them as profitable, sustainable businesses, and then where are the opportunities to engage with that sector.
I think that's
as I said, a lot of us is in KasiNomics and KasiNomic Revolution, and it's on Amazon and it's available in exclusive books and other bookstores. So I would recommend that's a really good starting point, even if I must say so myself.
No, perfect. I would very much endorse that, give it my vote of support as well. In terms of social media, anywhere people could follow your daily ramblings, your thoughts, I don't know, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, any of those?
So I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and I've got a KasiNomics Facebook page. So
perfect.
Well, we'll follow either of those, and I'm posting 2 to 3 times a week, I think.
Okay, I'll link to those in the description as well. But I think that's the perfect opportunity on which to end in the midst of an ongoing lockdown, one of probably the strictest lockdowns in the world, when people are getting very sad and depressed about the future. I think you've given us a lot to think about and a lot of use that people can use going forward. Some gaps for opportunity that South Africa could take if we're really serious about changing things around. So, GG, I want to thank you very, very much for your time, for your expertise today. I've really enjoyed it and appreciated it. I hope the viewers and the listeners have as well. Viewers, to you, thank you once again for joining us on this episode. Please remember to like this video. Please share it all over your different social media platforms. We are sharing our podcast on other platforms now, including Spotify. Please subscribe there if you're listening on any of those platforms. And also, please remember to stay safe, stay healthy as much as you can now. Again, let's look forward to the end of the month when we might get some news about level 3 and going down, easing some restrictions on the economy and most importantly, on people's lives. But I think we'll end there for this episode. We'll talk to you all again soon. And for now, bye.
Thank you.